Most hosts don't realize they're making free pricing mistakes, and it's costing them thousands and thousands of dollars every single month. So keep listening so you won't be one of them.
Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.
Hey, welcome back to Get Paid for Your Pad. This is Jasper. We are starting a new revenue management series called RefUp, where every Monday I'll be sharing behind the scenes insights from working with the top 1% hosts from all across the world who are generating at least $1 million in bookings, the different OTAs. Today we're going to be talking about minimum night stay settings. But to give some more context on why we decided to do this series, I want to explain a little bit about the goal is behind this.
What's up, guys? Eric here. And before we dive into this episode, I want to introduce you to our podcast sponsor, Freewyld Foundry. Freewyld Foundry is a revenue management service, white glove, high touch service for the top 1% short-term rental operators. We're currently managing over $60 million in bookings, 1,700 listings worldwide, and we are growing very, very quickly. Our RPM program is a done-for-you revenue management service, and I want to invite you, if you are a short-term rental operator that's doing $1 million or more, or maybe about 15 listings or more, head over to freewildfoundry.com and apply for one of our free revenue audit reports. This is where Jasper and the team will actually take a look at your pricing strategy, audit all of your Airbnb listings, and let you know if you're leaving money on the table. So this is free to everyone who's listening to this podcast. Head over to freewildfoundry.com and apply for your free audit report.
You know, a while back, I sat down and I really looked at what are the three things where most operators leave money on the table. And I came to the conclusion that those are these three things. Number one, it's pacing, which we talked about last week with Eric. Pacing is essentially talks about where in the booking window you're getting booked, right? Compared to similar units in your area, right? What we call a comp set, or you could call it the market. So that's one topic that we will discuss a lot because it's extremely important. The second part is your minimum night stay settings, because where pacing really drives your pricing, in the sense that pacing will give you an indication whether your prices are too low or too high. Your minimum night stay settings really drive your availability, right? So it dictates when guests can book your units and how long of a stay they can book, if they can check in or check out or not on certain days. And so while pricing drives your pricing, minimum night stay settings really drive your availability. And then the third part is leveraging OTA specific discounts that give you marketing benefits, what we also call merchandising, right? So making sure that if you're offering a discount, that the guest is actually going to see the discount in the pricing breakdown, because otherwise they don't know that they're getting a discount. And so using OTA discount strategies effectively is really driving your conversion, because when people know that they're getting a discount, they're more likely to book. So those are really the three areas where we see most operators leave a lot of money on the table. And so this series, RefUp, is going to be covering those three concepts. Now, obviously, there's a lot to talk about. We could do a lot of episodes, within these three categories. But today I want to talk about minimum night stay settings, and wanted to really start at the beginning and ask the question of, why do we even have minimum night stay settings in the first place? Why don't we just allow guests to book a single night whenever they want? If you've ever stayed at a hotel, you've probably noticed that most hotels, they allow a guest to stay for one night, pretty much any time. There's some hotels who might restrict a New Year's or Christmas or Thanksgiving, but for the most part, hotels offer full flexibility when it comes to their minimum night stay settings. And there's a reason why they do, because essentially there are three reasons why you would restrict availability in your calendar, essentially, right? Number one is operations. If you get a one-night booking for your property every single day, you might not have enough cleaners to do the turnovers. Your cleaners may have to drive a while to get to your properties. You might just not have the capacity to support that operation, right? The second reason that you might want to restrict your availability is reducing risk. So one night stays typically have a higher risk because if somebody wants to book a party, for example, they're probably going to look for a one night stay, right? Because if you want to throw a party, you're not going to rent a place for a week. You're going to rent it for one night. And so especially last minute one night stays can be more risky, or probably are more risky than longer stays. So that's the second reason that you might want to restrict your availability. And the third reason is revenue optimization. You want to protect your high value dates from becoming unbookable because somebody's booked part of a typical stay and now you're left with 1 or 2 nights in that stay that you can't book. So for example, let me go back to the hotel. So why do hotels mostly offer one night stays? Number one, because they don't have the operational challenges. Some hotel with like 50 rooms, they have their in-house cleaners. All the rooms are in one location. The rooms are very similar. They're pretty easy to turn around. And so hotels have their own laundry, they have their own linens, and it's very easy for a hotel to turn around these rooms. And so hotels almost never have operational restrictions when it comes to turnovers. Okay. Number two, a hotel, the risk of someone throwing a party in a hotel room to start with is a lot lower, right? Because people will want to rent like a larger space to throw parties. You're not going to rent a 200 square feet hotel room and then throw a party for like 50 of your friends, right? Also, hotels have security. They typically don't have neighbors that can complain and then threaten your STR license. So hotels are, by nature, they have the risk for a hotel is just a lot lower. Even if people throw a party in a hotel, like security can just come over and knock on the door and, kick some people out. And it's pretty easy to solve for the most part, right? So because hotels don't have those first two factors, the hotels are only concerned about their revenue. They're only maximizing revenue. And because a hotel has multiple rooms, let's say a hotel has 30 rooms, they don't need to necessarily protect those rooms as much because, they're typically not going to be 100% booked anyway. And people book shorter stays in hotels as well. So if the hotel does have like a 1 night gap or 2 night gap, it's not as big of a deal because first of all, those nights won't become unbookable because they allow 1 night stays. And there's probably a higher demand for 1 night stays as well. Plus they don't run as much risk. Let's say you have like an 8-bedroom house and which generates like $500,000 a year, right? And that's your only source of income. If somebody books like a 1 night stay, let's say for Thanksgiving, you might have trouble filling up the days around the Thanksgiving, right? Because most people for that size of home are going to be looking to book a longer stay for Thanksgiving. And so if you get a 1 night stay on Thanksgiving on the Thursday, right, you're going to be losing out on a lot of money most likely, right? Versus a hotel, let's say a hotel has 30 rooms, it's a whole different story. They have 30 rooms to generate revenue. And again, like it's much easier for a hotel to, given the smaller size of the asset, it's much easier to rent out these smaller rooms for shorter stays. And there's always going to be demand for that. So long story short, there's 3 considerations when it comes to minimum night stays. It's operations, it's risk, and revenue optimization. Now, operations, obviously, that's something that has not a whole lot to do with revenue management. However, it is worth looking at your operations and seeing like, hey, can we optimize our operations or can we structure our operations in a different way so that we can handle more shorter stays? Because outside of some revenue optimization considerations, like the operations side, the shorter stays that you can handle operationally, the higher your revenue. And we'll dive into like why short stays are sometimes actually very attractive. Okay. But the point is like when it comes to your operations, you should aim to have as much flexibility as possible. That doesn't mean that you're always going to allow like a 1 night stay, right? Because we do have the revenue maximization considerations as well. But from an operational standpoint, it's best to be able to handle any type of turnover whenever you can. Now, when it comes to the risk side, I would say there's validity to the argument for sure. However, from what I've seen, most operators vastly overestimate the risk. And I think the reason for that, it's very anecdotal. And when something happens, like it can be very stressful and it can be traumatizing. If you ever had like somebody throw a party at your place and the neighbors complaining, police is there and like there's damage and like it's such a nightmare that most operators are, once you've experienced that, you're going to be like, no more one-night stays, no matter what. I don't want to go through this experience again, right? And so most operators feel like there's a very high risk. But the reality is, we have plenty of operators who allow one-night stays across the year, and it's very rare that parties actually happen, right? It's very rare that there is real damage coming from allowing those one-night stays, okay? It happens, and sometimes it's not really, from a business perspective, it's not really that big of a deal, but it's just stressful, and you just don't want to deal with it, It's more of an emotional consideration almost. And obviously, like, when it comes to the risk considerations, like it's up to the operator, it's up to you as a host to decide, how much risk do I want to take? How much stress am I willing to deal with on an emotional level? How much risk is there of losing my short-term rental license if the neighbors complain? Like, there's all these considerations. And as a revenue manager, like, I cannot make that decision for you. I can only tell you that I would bias on the side of more flexibility. And also, I would warn against making too many assumptions about what could happen, and kind of give it the benefit of the doubt and see if it's actually going to happen. Because we had several operators that we work with now that are allowing one-night stays, but when we started working with them, they'd be like, no, we wouldn't want one-night stays because we don't want parties. And I'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't think your units are particularly attractive to throw parties in the first place. So why don't we just test it out before we lose revenue? Because in our mind, we have a fear of these things happening. We don't actually know that those things actually would happen, right? We have several operators who are now doing one-night stays, and we haven't really had any issues. Plus, look, parties can always happen. Like, people can also book a 2-night or a 3-night stay and throw like a massive party. So it doesn't necessarily completely protect you, right? Plus, there's other ways that you can mitigate and avoid parties, right? There is what you put on your listing, like noise monitoring devices, like the way you communicate, the way you vet your guests. There's a lot of other factors involved. It's not just the minimum stay settings that will dictate how many parties you're going to have. So yeah, again, risk concerns, something that you have to decide for yourself as a host and an operator. I would just recommend, like, base your decision on data and make sure you consider the benefit of shorter stays as well, because there are a lot of benefits to a one-night stay. Let me dive into that a little bit. When you get a booking, there's 2 ways that you benefit from a booking. Number one, obviously, is the money that you're making. Now, for a one-night stay, that value is usually fairly low because people are only staying for one night. So let's say you're renting out a little studio unit for like $60, $70 a night. You might ask yourself, like, well, is it really worth the risk for me to make 20% management fee on a $60 booking? I'm going to be making $12, and I'm going to be risking that we're attracting like a bad quality guest or like a damage or parties or whatnot. And obviously the answer is no, the $12 is not worth it. But what you do have to consider is that indirect value to a booking as well, because that's another person that stayed with you. Or if it's a group, there are multiple people that have now stayed with you. They now know you or your brand, and they might come back. It's a client that you have. And everybody knows in marketing, it's easier to sell an existing customer than a new customer. So you got yourself an extra customer. I can guarantee you there's companies that pay a lot of money to acquire a customer, a lot more than they even make. A lot of companies invest more money into getting a customer than they will make from that customer on their first purchase. And so there's value to having a customer in the first place. And why does that have value? Obviously, because that person could come back, that person could tell somebody else about your business. But specifically on Airbnb, and to some extent as well for Vrbo and Booking.com, but mostly for Airbnb, Airbnb has an algorithm that is very strongly focusing on reviews and rating. And so having an extra review on Airbnb has a lot of value, especially in the beginning. Now, going from like 2 to 3 reviews or going from 3 to 6 reviews, that can make a big difference. Plus, there's value for the algorithm too, because when you allow one-night stays, like Airbnb and other platforms are going to show you to more people, and more people get exposed to your listings, even if they don't end up booking. They've now seen your listing. Plus, every booking is a signal to the OTA that your place is in demand. And so when you allow one-night stays, you will get more visibility on the platforms. There's no doubt about it. And that's not just going to be the case for the one-night stays. You're going to get more visibility for a 2-night, a 3-night, a 4-night, etc. From a revenue management perspective, it is definitely worth allowing those one-night stays, not for the money that you're making on the stay, but more for the indirect value that it creates for you. And obviously that indirect value also depends on your operations, because it depends on like, how do you monetize your existing customers? How often do you get somebody to come back, right? And what are you doing to entice those people to come back? If you don't collect emails and you don't reach out to your past guests, then that value is going to be a lot lower. But if you're building a strong brand and you're keeping in touch with your guests, then that does have a lot of value. So with that said, one night stays, there's definitely a lot of value in offering those. But going back to the free buckets that I was talking about before, the operations, the risk, and the revenue optimizations. Let's now go into revenue optimizations. So forget about operations, forget about risk. Kind of like how hotels think. A hotel just wants to maximize revenue, right? They don't really have those other considerations. So if you wouldn't have to worry about risk or operations, like why would you restrict any days for check-in or check-out, knowing that the more flexibility you give, the more visibility you have on the platforms, and so the more revenue that you will generate. People are usually willing to pay a higher price for a shorter stay. Example, I'm in Ibiza in Spain, beautiful island. There's incredible hotels here that are pretty expensive. For example, there's Six Senses Hotel on the island here that is absolutely beautiful. There's all sorts of celebrities that are staying there. That hotel is very expensive. They charge like $1,000 a night. Now, I would not book a 3 or 4 night stay there, because if I book a 4 night stay, it's going to cost me $4,000. Right? At least for now, that's a little bit outside of my budget. However, if I want to surprise my wife and give her like a special experience, I might book a 1 night stay there, because that's $1,000. And yeah, you only stay for 1 night, but you're getting the experience. We've now stayed at the hotel. We've enjoyed the amazing view. We felt that sense of like exclusivity and all the benefits of having that type of experience. My wife is going to feel very special, which obviously is the most valuable part of it. But you see what I mean? Like shorter stay, like you're willing to pay a higher price. And so allowing those shorter stays will typically generate more revenue. So why would we even restrict it then from a revenue management perspective? There's examples where a short stay could block a potential longer stay, where those other nights that would usually be part of that longer stay are now very hard to book or even become almost unbookable. So the best example I have of this is certain ski resorts in Europe, and this may have changed a little bit over the last like 20 years or so, since people now can book online and everything. But going back to when I was young, we used to go skiing in Austria every single year. And the way that you would book a hotel in a ski resort in the winter in Europe was basically, it's always from a Saturday to a Saturday. Like you could never even book like a 1 night or a 2 night stay in those hotels. They would always be Saturday to Saturday. Now with that in mind, so the demand for the accommodation, the vast majority of demand is Saturday to Saturday, because that's what people are used to. There's a reason why it's Saturday to Saturday, because you want to take a full week. Typically it's like most people will drive for like a day or so. So you'd leave like Friday after work, get there on Saturday, and then you leave on Saturday. So you have all the rest of the weekend to drive home. Kids can go to school Monday. Kids can still go to school on the Friday before. So there's a reason why that Saturday to Saturday pattern exists, right? So imagine I have a hotel in one of those ski resorts, and imagine I now open it up and let people book whenever they want. And let's just say that 95% of people are looking for that Saturday to Saturday stay. But there's a few people that live nearby who are like, you know what? Like if I can just go on a Wednesday when it's maybe less busy than the weekends, I'll just go for 1 day, If you open up your calendar for those 1 night stays, that 5% of people who are not looking for the Saturday to Saturday stay, they now can book your unit because you're one of the few hotels that are offering that. But now if somebody books that 1 night stay on a Wednesday, like now it's going to be really, really hard to fill up the other nights. The Tuesday, the Thursday, the Friday, maybe the Friday and Saturday a bit easier, but it's going to be very difficult. And you might have to lower your prices quite a bit because there's just so little demand for those nights, right? And so in that case, purely from a revenue management perspective, it's optimal to restrict your check-in and check-outs to like Saturdays. So for example, Thanksgiving, right? A lot of people will travel for 4 nights. They'll arrive on a Wednesday and maybe leave on a Sunday, or they might come in on a Tuesday and leave on Saturday or Friday. There's just a lot of people that travel for longer stays during Thanksgiving because it's a typical family traveling holiday, right? So if somebody books your Wednesday night, 1 night, it's going to be tough because most people want to check in not on Thanksgiving because that's the day that they want to celebrate. So most people want to check in on Wednesday or Tuesday. So if your Wednesday night is booked, or even if your Friday night is booked, it might be hard to fill the rest of those days, right? And so it makes sense because, again, the vast majority of the people that are traveling are looking for that longer stay. And so in those situations, it can be optimal to restrict your availability, right? Now, the question is like, how do you know when this makes sense and when this doesn't make sense? Well, there's some data that you can look at, right? First of all, you can look at the average length of stay in your market, and then you can look at certain dates as well. Like most of the pricing tools like PriceLabs, Wheelhouse, and Beyond Pricing, most of those tools have data where you can look at length of stay in your market. Right now, you don't necessarily want to look at your own length of stay data, because if I have a standard default 4-night length of stay, then I can look at my historic data, but all my stays are going to be 4 nights or longer. So that might give me the impression like, hey, everyone's looking for a 4-night stay. No, you're cutting out all the rest of that demand, right? You got to look at market data. And so based on the market data, you can decide, right? I would say that if more than half of the demand, a certain amount of days or longer, then it's probably worthwhile to restrict it, right? So let's say if more than 50% of people are looking for a 4-night stay, then I think it could be worth restricting it for starting off with a 4-night stay. And then obviously you want to make it more flexible, reduce it to like a 3-night or a 2-night as you get closer. But half of the demand is certain length or longer, then it could make sense. It's very situational as well, but and nobody really knows what the optimal settings are, because you can't really calculate it necessarily. So we kind of have to use our gut feeling a little bit, but there is some data to base our decision on, right? If I look at Thanksgiving in a certain market and I see that most people travel for 2 nights, then I know that like having a 3 or 4-night minimum stay is not going to be optimal, because we're cutting out too much of the demand. And when you cut out too much of the demand, let's say, for example, we restrict it to a 4-night, but only like 20% of people are actually looking for that 4-night stay. And let's say the booking window is 120 days. And let's say we only release it like 30 days in advance, which is a pretty typical thing what we see operators do. Like a lot of people have this idea that further out they should be more restrictive with their minimum stay settings. It's based on a feeling, and it's based on a vague idea of like, well, we can restrict it far out because we still have time to book if we don't get booked, right? But you are restricting a lot of demands, right? And it does often restrict you from getting bookings early on, so far out. And those bookings are usually very valuable. So restricting the early part of the booking window is generally not a very good idea. But anyway, going back to my example, if only 10% of the people are looking for those 4-night stays, then you're cutting your chances of getting booked early in the booking window a lot. And so that's generally not a good idea. So I can't give you a perfect if this then that rule on how to manage this, but I will tell you that I would play strong devil's advocate against your own argument. Whenever you want to restrict and put like a 3-night, a 4-night, a 5-night, really challenge yourself and really make sure that the data justifies that decision, because more often than not, hosts are too restrictive because they base their decision on this idea of like, oh, further out, I don't need to get booked, 4 months in advance. I have plenty of time, so I'm just going to restrict it. And if it doesn't book, we'll book it closer. But the reality is, the closer you get to check-in date, the lower the price you're probably going to have to charge, because for the simple reason that most hosts are decreasing their prices as check-in gets closer. So obviously last minute, like you're not going to be able to charge premium prices like you could early in the booking window unless it's like a Taylor Swift concert or whatnot. So in general, look at your minimum night stay strategy and think about your operations. Is there anything that you can do to allow for more flexibility? Number 2 is kind of challenge yourself a little bit on that risk that those shorter stays have. Do you actually have data on that? Like how often has it happened compared to how much money have you made with shorter stays? Like just realize there's a lot of value in offering shorter stays and just take that in consideration. I see a lot of operators who ask for a revenue report with us, and I look at our PriceLabs, and it's such a standard that people seem to have. It's like it's a 2-night weekend and weekday, and then 30 days out turns into a 3-3 or a 2-3, and 60 nights out it turns into like a 4-4, like a 3-4. Oftentimes people restrict the weekends more than the weekdays, and oftentimes it's not really based on any data, on real data, because not every market is a heavy weekend market. And then 90 days out or 120 days out, they'll turn it into like a 4-4 or 5-5 or whatever it is. And you look at the market data and it's like, okay, well, the market pretty much like people are booking on average a 2-night stay throughout the year. Like the median length of stay will be 2. And so there's no real reason to have so many restrictions. Basically what it does, it basically guarantees that you're going to get most of your bookings in the last 30 days. If your booking is 90 days, booking window, you're losing out for the most part, you're losing out on 2/3 of the booking window. And last episode I did with Eric, we talked about how you have kind of like the early bookers and the mid bookers and the last minute bookers. Actually, I'm not sure if we talked about that, but anyway, we'll talk about that more in the future. But if you're cutting out like the early and middle part of your booking window by setting those restrictive minimum night stay settings, you're essentially relying almost 100% on the last 30 days when everybody else is bringing down the prices. So good luck trying to get premium prices, right? For when you're relying on the last part of the booking window. So yeah, that's my suggestion. Take a look at your strategy, really challenge yourself, understand that more flexibility typically leads to more revenue. Also, just because you allow a 2-night stay doesn't mean that everyone's going to book a 2-night stay. People will still book 3-night, 4-night, 5-night stays, right? So that's it for now. We're going to talk a lot more about minimum night stays because there's so much more to talk about. There is like orphan gaps, adjacencies, like dynamic minimum night stay settings. There's so much to talk about when it comes to minimum night stay settings. And again, it's one of the 3 major categories where we see most operators lose a lot of money. So with that said, if you want us to take a look at your portfolio and give you direct feedback, and if you are a larger operator, because our service, we work with operators who do at least $1 million in yearly top line revenue. If that's you, then go to freewyld.foundry.com/report. Okay. It's a simple application. Once we receive your application, we're going to look at your strategy and we're going to give you direct feedback on your strategy. And then based on whether we think we can bring you value or not, we'll let you know how we can work together. But either way, like you're going to get some real feedback, some real honest feedback on your strategy. So I think that's very valuable. And with that said is the end of this episode. So again, every Monday, I'm going to do a RefUp podcast. And sometimes there will be a guest, one of our clients typically, or sometimes I will just chat by myself. So hope you enjoyed this episode and we'll see you next Monday. We also do a episode on Friday with Kay and Eric as well. So make sure you listen to that. And lastly, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss our episodes, right? We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube, we're everywhere. We love hearing from you. So like, comment, that really helps us attract a broader audience. So appreciate your support and until next time, take care.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.